Okay, let's dive into the stack of sources you've sent our way. It's quite a mix, isn't it?
It really is, yeah.
We've got everything here from reports on global conflicts and major economic shifts to battles over domestic policy and, well, the bleeding edge of military text.
It's certainly a comprehensive look at a lot of critical things happening right now, pulling from, quite a few different angles.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the goal of this deep dive. We're going to walk through your material together, pull out the key insights and facts, and help you connect the dots to understand what's really going on across these diverse areas,
Yeah.
strictly based on what's in these reports.
Right.
Think of it as our guided tour through the information you've gathered.
We'll do our best to synthesize it, highlight what seems most significant based on the sources, and make sure you get the core picture without getting too bogged down.
All right, let's start with something that has immediate economic impact and definitely stirs up international friction. U.S. tariff policy and, well, its fallout.
Okay. Based on the CBC and CBS sources you've provided, the big news here is the U.S. doubling tariffs on steel and aluminum. We're looking at a jump from 25% to 50%.
50%. Wow. And this change was effective, 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday? The reports say it applies to nearly all U.S. trading partners.
Uh-huh. There's a specific note about the UK being an exception. Their tariffs stay at 25% for now, with the expectation of dropping to zero once their trade agreement is finalized.
Okay, and the White House justification, according to the sources, is all about boosting American manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
They defended the move by saying the president doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk too and is delivering on his promises, standard justifications.
Right, but what really jumps out from the sources is the reported practical effect on industries, particularly in Canada. Canadian steel producers are already seeing shipments to the U.S. down by 30%.
Yep.
They say this jump to 50% means the damage could get even worse. One quote is particularly vivid, describing the U.S. market as completely closed door slammed shut, calling it an SOS moment.
Wow, door slammed shut. That phrase really underscores the severity they're feeling.
It does.
And it's not just abstract numbers. The reports mention nearly 700 steelworkers in Canada have already been laid off in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie.
Yeah, and they're expecting a dramatic acceleration of production level loss and job loss. That's the quote.
Oof.
And for Canadian aluminum, the reliance on the U.S. market is even higher. More than 90% of their exports go south of the border, so the impact there is clearly substantial as well.
Makes sense.
The Canadian government's reaction, as reported, is that the Prime Minister calls these tariffs unlawful and unjustified, and has promised to direct revenue from any retaliatory tariffs towards Canadian workers.
Okay. And looking at the U.S. side, the footwear industry is mentioned, still reportedly trying to recover from previous 145% tariffs on China.
That's right. A spokesperson there is quoted expressing worry about price increases and notes the industry consensus seems strongly against tariffs, saying he's yet to find them, meaning supporters, I guess.
Right.
What's fascinating here is how widely these tariffs reach, according to the sources. They apply not just to raw steel and aluminum, but also to the components made of these metals used in most finished products.
So it ripples out.
Exactly. There's an example of a company selling things like garage cabinets and outdoor kitchens that says they are trying to absorb these added costs to avoid passing them on to U.S. customers.
That's got to be tough. And the speed of these changes is highlighted as a key challenge, right? One quote describes it being done in a very quick manner, calling that the most challenging thing for businesses.
Yeah, very sudden. And these tariff moves are also happening alongside broader trade negotiations. The sources mention a USTR letter urging partners to make their best offer by Wednesday, July 9th, setting a clear deadline for trade deals.
So pressure's on.
Seems like it. The president reportedly expects good deals, and there might even be a call with China's president this week, though the existing 30% tariffs on Chinese goods remain in place.
Gotcha. The market reaction in the material is interesting, too. Stocks are pulling closer to records, but there's definitely uncertainty noted.
Right, like Dollar General, for instance, reported a profit rise but added a caution about the rest of the year due to tariff concerns.
So we see a policy aimed at boosting domestic manufacturing, but reports from various industries and countries indicate immediate negative impacts and uncertainty, highlighting the complex ripple effects of these rapid changes.
Yeah, it's a complicated picture.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly, but stay on U.S. economic policy. Your sources also bring up the debate around a significant spending bill, sometimes referred to as the Big Beautiful Bill.
Ah, yes. This is the controversial U.S. spending bill that, according to independent analysts cited in your sources, is projected to add at least $1 trillion to the deficit, despite also featuring large tax cuts.
$1 trillion. And here's where it gets really interesting. Elon Musk, who recently stepped down from a White House advisory role focused on budget cuts, has been a very vocal critic.
Very vocal.
The sources quote him calling it outrageous, a disgusting abomination, and pork-filled on social media. He didn't pull any punches, saying, "Shame on those who voted for it."
Yeah, pretty strong words. And these comments, according to the reports, provide ammunition for Republican critics of the bill.
No.
However, it's also noted that GOP leaders are publicly pushing back against Musk's view, arguing instead that tax cuts stimulate economic growth and ultimately generate more revenue. Classic argument.
Right. And Musk's criticism went further with a quoted threat to fire all politicians who betrayed the American people in November of next year. This public clash ties into the broader picture of the Trump administration's approach to economics and government spending, as outlined in other parts of your sources.
It definitely highlights the tension between different visions for fiscal policy, even within, nominal political alignments.
Okay, let's move from economic friction to urgent global flashpoints. Your sources contain some deeply concerning reports from Gaza.
Yes, the sources paint a very grim picture, focusing on the violence happening around 8 distribution sites in Rafah.
What did they say specifically?
They report incidents like one on June 3rd, where Israeli forces reportedly fired on crowds seeking aid, resulting in at least 27 deaths and over 90 wounded.
And that wasn't the only one.
No, this followed a similar event just 2 days prior, killing 31 and wounding over 170.
Witnesses described a chaotic scene. Families were moving towards a site run by the U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF.
And were reportedly attacked by soldiers and quadcopter drones. Many of the wounded had injuries to the head and chest.
What was the official response?
Israel's official statement, as reported, denied firing on innocent civilians. The military stated warning shots were fired near individuals who had gone off designated routes into a military zone, reportedly about 1 kilometer away from the GHF site.
Okay.
And added they are investigating the area beyond the secure site.
But the humanitarian context is severe. The reports describe dire food shortages, with many living in shelters.
Absolutely. Survivors quoted in the sources described the shooting as indiscriminate and stated no aid was actually available at the time they were attacked.
And the overall toll.
Gaza's health ministry also reported 51 deaths and 500 injuries from strikes across the territory in the past 24 hours, included in the sources.
There were broader reports too, right? About schools.
Yes. Broader reports in your material also provide context. A Guardian report suggests deadly airstrikes on schools sheltering displaced people, mentioning 6 schools attacked. Over 120 killed were part of a deliberate Israeli strategy, loosening rules on strikes where many civilians are present.
And UNICEF had a statement.
A particularly powerful one, yeah. Stating over 50,000 children have been killed or injured since October 2023. Their quote asks, "How many more dead girls and boys will it take? What level of horror must be live-streamed before the international community fully steps up and takes bold, decisive action to force the end of this ruthless killing of children?"
That's devastating.
Separately, the sources also note that Israeli settler attacks in the West Bank are at their highest rate in at least 2 decades, averaging 44 Palestinians injured each month.
These reports contribute to growing allegations of war crimes. Notably, a former State Department spokesperson under President Biden is quoted now stating his belief that Israel has committed war crimes in Gaza.
Right, and that Israeli soldiers are not being held accountable, a significant shift from his previous statements representing the U.S. government.
And the UN.
The UN Secretary General is also reported to have called for an immediate and independent investigation into Sunday's massacre.
The material also mentioned Israeli military losses.
It did, yeah, including 3 soldiers killed in fighting in northern Gaza, likely from a blast. This was the deadliest assault on their forces since the March ceasefire halt, bringing their total reported losses to approximately 860 troops since October 2023.
Okay, let's pivot to another major global conflict, the war in Ukraine, focusing on surprising innovation and stalled diplomatic efforts.
Right. Your sources detail a significant Ukrainian spider's web drone assault on Russian airbases. What stands out immediately is the scale and reach.
Yeah, what was so significant?
It targeted 4 or 5 bases deep inland, and critically, the 117 drones were launched from inside Russia using covert truck-mounted cabins.
From inside Russia? That's remarkable. Incredible intelligence and operational capability behind enemy lines.
Exactly. The reported impact is substantial. damaging or destroying over 40 Tupolev bombers aircraft vital for Russia's long-range missions that, according to the sources, cannot be replaced.
No, the cost.
The estimated financial loss is $7 billion. In total, 41 aircraft were damaged or destroyed, including rare A-50 surveillance planes.
So the strategic implications are huge.
Profound, according to the sources. This isn't just a tactical victory. It's a blow to Moscow's long-range capability. It exposes deep security failures within Russia itself, forcing them to rethink how they defend their key assets.
And it shows Ukraine's reach.
Definitely. Demonstrates Ukraine's intelligence reach, capable of hitting targets over 3,000 miles away, underscoring Kyiv's growing prowess in asymmetric warfare.
It really highlights how drones have, well, revolutionized modern warfare in this conflict.
Completely. The sources note Ukraine's drone arsenal is central to its defense and reportedly accounts for up to 70% of Russian equipment losses.
70%.
Ah.
Think about that. 70% of their equipment losses, according to these reports, are thanks to drones.
It's staggering. And Ukraine has incredibly ambitious production goals, over 1 million this year, planning for 2.5 million next year, driven by an agile, almost startup-like industry that's innovating much faster than Russia. Examples like Skyfall's Vampire and Shrike are mentioned.
And it's not just offensive drones, right? They're working on counter-drone tech, too.
Yeah, what's also fascinating is the focus on counter-drone efforts. Ukraine is reportedly seeking drones specifically designed to identify and shoot down others, with prototypes from companies like Origin Robotics.
Like what?
There's interest in things like drone interceptors, even using fixed-wing drones essentially as missiles to smash into enemy platforms, and UAVs equipped with recoilless shotguns. Wild stuff.
It's interesting that these military advancements were happening just as peace talks took place.
Yeah, Istanbul hosted talks on Monday, the day after that major drone attack. They did achieve one concrete outcome, agreeing on a large prisoner and body exchange.
What did that involve?
Including wounded POWs, young conscripts, and 6,000 fallen soldiers for Ukraine. Russia reportedly offered 10 deported children, while Ukraine demanded hundreds.
But the bigger picture,
Yep.
still divided.
Very much so. The sources make it very clear there are deep, fundamental divisions on ending the war. Ukraine pushed for an unconditional ceasefire and a future summit involving Zelensky, Putin, and Trump.
And Russia
Rejected this entirely, offering only a brief 2-3-day truce and presenting what Kyiv dismissed as ultimatums. Demands to cede 4 regions, abandon NATO hopes, demobilize forces, and lift martial law.
So no real progress on peace.
No. The reports conclude no real path to peace emerged, and positions remain hardened.
There's also mention of potential international pressure building, sanctions.
The U.S. Senate may be working on a sweeping bipartisan sanctions bill targeting Russia, which could include steep tariffs, like 500% on nations importing Russian energy, such as China and India.
Is there support for that?
House Speaker Johnson is quoted supporting sanctioning Russia as strongly as we can. It's noted that it's unclear if President Trump supports this specific bill amidst ongoing talks.
And Zelensky.
He, for his part, expressed readiness for a potential summit in Turkey with Erdogan, Trump, and Putin, stating his belief that there will be no ceasefire without our meeting.
Okay. And finally, in this section, there was an opinion piece comparing it to Afghanistan.
Yeah, drawing a comparison, warning the U.S. risks repeating mistakes in Ukraine by over-relying on military aid without a strong diplomatic track, potentially making Ukraine too dependent and marginalizing them in future negotiations. Food for thought.
Okay, let's shift focus now to domestic policy battles playing out closer to home and their societal impacts, starting with immigration, borders, and security.
Right. The sources you provided mention Canada's proposed federal bill aimed at strengthening border security.
And in the U.S., there are several reports of recent ICE actions that have drawn attention. Arrests of high school students.
Yes, arrests that sparked protests, including one in Massachusetts and another in New York, Pennsylvania. One student was reportedly taken into custody despite not being the intended target.
And the justification.
An ICE official was quoted citing sanctuary policies, local rules that limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement as driving operations in those communities. A federal judge has reportedly ordered notice before transferring one of the students.
There were other things, too, involving airlines and politicians' planes.
Yeah, the sources also note reports of Avilo Airlines facing boycotts due to contracts operating ICE deportation flights. And VP J.D. Vance's campaign plane was reportedly chartered multiple times this year by the Trump administration for deportations to Guatemala and El Salvador.
And using false identities.
There's even an allegation that ICE agents in Tucson, Arizona, used false identities, claiming to be utility workers, to ambush and detain a Honduran man.
Wow. At the state level, Texas is mentioned.
Yes, the governor of Texas is expected to sign a bill that would require most state sheriffs to collaborate with ICE in arresting and detaining immigrants.
This connects to broader security and hate crime concerns highlighted in your sources. The suspect in the recent firebombing in Boulder, Colorado.
Right, an Egyptian national who was in the U.S. illegally has been charged with a federal hate crime and attempted murder after injuring 12 people. He was reportedly a father of 5.
He allegedly planned the attack for a year and used Molotov cocktails, reportedly because his immigration status prevented him from legally purchasing firearms.
He yelled "Free Palestine" and wanted to kill all Zionist people, but reportedly didn't complete his plan because he got scared. The sources quote the AG calling it an anti-Semitic act of terror.
And President Trump's reaction.
His statement on the incident was also included, emphasizing it as a reason to keep borders secure and deport illegal anti-American radicals. The sources note this attack followed a fatal shooting outside the Israeli embassy in Washington.
Okay. Moving to another area of political and cultural friction, your sources discuss debates over government funding and even the names of military assets, starting with public broadcasting.
Yes. President Trump has reportedly requested Congress wipe out funding for U.S. public broadcasting, which amounts to $1.1 billion over 2 years.
How's that done?
This is being done through a rescission request, which is described as unquestionably legal and needs a simple majority in each chamber within 45 days to pass.
And the arguments for the cuts.
Arguments in favor, particularly from Republican allies, include accusations that NPR and PBS have become radical left-wing echo chambers for a narrow audience of mostly wealthy, white, urban liberals, quoting Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Anyone else?
House Speaker Johnson noted these cuts were identified by Elon Musk's efficiency task force as wasteful, duplicative, outdated.
Okay, but arguments against the cuts are significant and varied in your sources, right?
Certainly. The PBS CEO stated it would devastate stations, especially in rural communities, leading to the loss of unique local programming and emergency services, arguing nothing more American than PBS.
And NPR's CEO
warned local radio stations face immediate budget shortfalls, potentially causing layoffs and show cancellations. She also questioned the request's legality, arguing it's explicitly viewpoint-based and aimed at controlling and punishing content, violates the Public Broadcasting Act, the First Amendment, and the Due Process Clause. Quite the legal challenge there.
Democratic leaders framed it how?
As President Trump settling political scores and undermining the free press, a letter from over 100 congressional representatives argued public stations fill vital gaps left by commercial media.
Like providing local news.
Exactly. Providing timely, reliable local news and educational content, especially in remote and rural areas like Alaska or Minnesota, where they can be the only local news source.
Politically, what are the chances?
The reports note this faces a difficult path in the Senate, with some Republicans favoring retaining funding for vital services.
And this isn't the first time targeting public broadcasting.
No. While this rescission request is described as legal, it's part of a broader pattern of actions by the Trump administration targeting public broadcasting that have faced legal challenges, including previous attempts to control the CPB board and executive orders restricting funding.
Okay, shifting from funding to names. Your sources discuss the Trump administration's ongoing effort to change names of military bases and landmarks, and now, reportedly, considering changes for Navy ships.
That's right. The stated reasons for the Navy ship name reviews are to reflect the Commander-in-Chief's priorities, our nation's history, and the warrior ethos.
A specific proposal highlighted in the material is changing the name of the USNS Harvey Milk,
which is named after the first openly gay man elected to office in California.
Yes. What's particularly notable here is the timing, right?
Right.
Coming during Pride Month.
Exactly, which also coincides with the anniversary of the 1969 Stonewall Uprising. Mark Siegel, who was at Stonewall, is quoted reflecting on the unity of the movement, including trans individuals.
This connects to broader concerns mentioned in the sources about erasing history.
Yeah. The National Park Service website reportedly removed T for transgender from the Stonewall history description without explanation.
And a historian commented.
A historian is quoted saying, "This disturbs me, and worries we're not done yet seeing this effort to scrub and rewrite American history," emphasizing that these things start slowly, and you can't discuss events like the Civil War without acknowledging race and slavery.
Are other ships potentially affected?
The sources also list other ships on the recommended list for renaming. all named for significant American trailblazers like Thurgood Marshall, Harriet Tubman, Cesar Chavez, and Medgar Evers.
Okay. Finally, in this domestic segment, let's look at reports on environmental policy rollbacks.
Right. Your sources cover the Trump administration easing environmental regulations. The EPA administrator's argument is that regulations burden industry and rolling them back will spur the economy.
But the reported impact on communities is a major focus here. Houston is singled out.
As one of the most polluted cities, yeah.
Yeah.
And people living near oil refineries are quoted expressing concern that they don't know what is in the air.
Is a health perspective, too.
From a human health perspective, a doctor at the University of Houston who treats patients at high risk for lung disease, asthma, and heart attacks due to emissions is quoted explaining how tiny particles bypass a lot of our defenses and injure tissue.
And there was a specific study mentioned about a coal plant.
Yes. A 2018 Rice University study found that pollution from a Houston area coal plant contributed to 177 premature deaths a year.
And a specific regulation change.
And the sources detail a specific regulatory change from April, where the Trump administration gave 68 plants, including this coal plant, a 2-year exemption from federal rules designed to lower mercury emissions, a powerful toxin known to affect the brain.
Wow. And where are these plants located?
A CBS News analysis in the sources highlights a striking disparity. Nearly 65% of these exempted plants are located within 3 miles of low-income minority communities.
So it disproportionately affects certain groups.
A quote from the material reinforces this point. Bottom line is who is more at risk are poor people.
This also feeds into the ongoing energy debate, right? Coal versus renewables.
Absolutely. The Sierra Club director argues increasing production at coal plants will kill more people and cause heart attacks and asthma attacks. He challenges the idea that coal provides more reliable energy.
What does he advocate?
Arguing instead that solar, wind, and batteries gives you the most reliable, the most resilient grid, and the least pollution.
What did the plant donor say?
The coal plant owner's statement included says their units operate in compliance with current standards.
And the administration's view.
And the Trump administration's statement argues that Biden-era coal plant regulations strain our electrical grid and undermine our national security by leaving America vulnerable to electricity shortages.
Okay. Moving to our final segment, let's dive into public health, science, and federal agencies with a focus on significant shifts in U.S. federal vaccine policy reported in your sources.
Right. The material frames these as significant changes happening in the first half of 2025, with some potentially harming health and safety. One major point is the criticism of HHS mismanaging the measles response in the Southwest U.S.
That was a big outbreak, wasn't it?
Yeah, where the sources note the largest outbreak in 25 years occurred, with over 1,000 cases and several deaths.
And the criticisms of the response.
Criticisms included the secretary reportedly making misstatements about vaccine safety, endorsing unproven treatments, preventing experts from briefing the public, and cutting grant funds for states' response. A lot going on there.
There's also a reporting change in the COVID vaccine status on the CDC schedule.
Yes, for healthy children and pregnant women. The HHS secretary reportedly announced this change on X without consulting the CDC itself.
So what's the current recommendation?
The updated CDC schedules now place routine childhood COVID vaccination in a shared decision-making category and are not recommending it during pregnancy.
Which contradicts other medical advice.
It does, despite the CDC previously listing pregnancy as a conclusive risk factor for adverse COVID outcomes. Notably, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology is quoted as highly recommending vaccination during pregnancy, creating a clear discrepancy.
What are the implications of this change?
Commentary from experts with the American College of Physicians warns these moves may undermine COVID-19 vaccine coverage for millions, as the ACA requires insurers cover ACIP-recommended vaccines.
And they criticize the process.
They criticize what they call the politicization of science and public health, which erodes trust, advocating for a risk-based approach that considers social factors while safeguarding individual autonomy.
Another concerning report is about banning publication in major journals.
Yeah, the secretary reportedly planning to ban government scientists from publishing in leading medical journals like NJM, JAMA, Lancet, claiming they are corrupted by pharmaceutical interests.
And the alternative?
He proposes creating new in-house government-run journals, arguing NIH funding proves legitimacy.
How's that being received?
Critics argue, as noted in the sources, that this proposal undermines credibility, limits vital peer review, and politicizes research, coming after previous research funding cuts under the Trump administration.
There have also been shifts in vaccine research funding reported, away from next-gen vaccines.
That's right. HHS abruptly pulled $500 million from next-generation vaccines contracts to instead study older whole virus vaccine technology favored by two appointees. This technology is described as 70 years old and thought to be less effective and have more adverse effects.
And HIV vaccine research.
What's particularly striking is the reported end of HIV vaccine research. Numerous projects were abruptly stopped, and the NIH was reportedly instructed not to fund new efforts.
Which is described as
Called a massive setback, especially given the global impact of HIV, with hundreds of thousands of deaths worldwide last year.
There's also reported confusion regarding leadership at the CDC.
After the previous acting director was reportedly forced aside, the secretary testified that the chief of staff is now acting director, despite the CDC website still listing him as chief of staff.
And his qualifications.
Critics in the sources question his legal qualifications, describing him as a former trial attorney with no discernible public health experience, although the secretary called him a public health expert. This matters because the CDC director oversees vaccine work and the schedule.
Are there delays in recommendations, too?
There are also delays in ACIP recommendations noted. The secretary has reportedly delayed action on recommendations for RSV vaccines for older adults and a new meningococcal vaccine, although a recommendation for a new chikungunya vaccine was adopted.
And the hiring of an anti-vaccine activist.
The sources also report the hiring of David Geyer by HHS to investigate vaccine safety questions. Geyer is described as a leading source of misinformation by critics, and a report from his investigation is pending.
What about funding for states?
Another unresolved issue involved cuts to state vaccination funds. A federal judge ruled the administration cannot proceed with $11 billion in cuts to state public health funds, some of which are used for vaccination clinics and outbreak monitoring, though the issue is reportedly unresolved.
Finally, this MAHA report. Make Our Children Healthy Again.
Yes. The White House issued an initial Make Our Children Healthy Again assessment, or MAHA report. A section on vaccines questions the vaccine schedule expansion, trial adequacy, safety monitoring, the vaccine injury compensation program, and mandates.
But it's been criticized.
It's criticized in the sources for inaccuracy and AI errors, and reportedly doesn't provide evidence that vaccines are unsafe, ineffective, or cause chronic illness, but is noted as a potential roadmap for future policy changes.
So what are experts watching now?
So experts are watching several things closely, including a potential HHS investigation into a link between autism and vaccines. They're looking for scientific rigor and any attempt to specifically link it to vaccines. They're also watching for potential CDC reorganization that could undermine safety surveillance, changes to HHS websites that might reduce vaccine confidence, and the presence of rival views within HHS regarding vaccine safety and development.
Okay. Let's wrap things up by looking at geopolitical tech, military posture, and strategic dependencies. Space concerns first.
Right. Your sources highlight concerns in space regarding Russia's newest low-Earth orbit satellite, Cosmos 2588. It's reportedly operating near a U.S. government satellite, specifically USA 338, which is reportedly an NRO spy satellite.
And the concern is AS-SAT weapons.
Exactly. This proximity raises suspicion for U.S. Space Command that these Cosmos models might be anti-satellite ASAT weapons rather than just surveillance platforms.
Has this happened before?
This concern is amplified by previous incidents, like a Cosmos satellite in 2020 that fired a high-speed projectile, which U.S. and U.K. military leaders explicitly called a clear ASAT weapons test.
Any other confirmation?
Slingshot Aerospace, an analysis firm, identified Cosmos 2588 as a Nivelier military inspection satellite with a suspected kinetic weapon on board. So, yeah, worrying signs there.
Moving from space to drones, your sources discuss the U.S. Pentagon's significant push for drone innovation, explicitly stating they are learning lessons from the war in Ukraine.
Yes. This effort is formalized in Project GI, a $20 million initiative. The goal is to accelerate U.S. drone development by building a rapid design, testing, and deployment cycle that incorporates frontline feedback quickly.
Kind of like Ukraine does it.
Essentially mimicking Ukraine's real-time adaptation. Companies like Shield AI are mentioned as iterating software fixes and redeploying within just 24 hours.
And the focus is on cheaper, faster drones.
Pretty much. Low-cost, less exquisite drones, prioritizing speed and volume over extreme complexity for faster adaptation. A key strategic goal is also reducing dependence on Chinese-made components, aiming for domestic production scale-ups within 12-15 months.
Are there examples of this in action?
Examples of U.S. military efforts include the Army advancing drone capabilities alongside Philippine forces in Exercise Balikatan 25, operating medium and long-range drones with a reach up to 30 kilometers, 10 times more than last year, enabling deeper reconnaissance and strike.
Wow.
They're also using 3D printing for drones and parts right there in the field and integrating electronic warfare and counter-drone gear.
This all circles back to Ukraine, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Where the drone war is clearly reshaping battlefield tactics.
Deterrence theory and global military procurement priorities. Big changes.
Shifting focus to China, trade, and supply chain vulnerabilities, your sources report increasing U.S.-China trade frictions despite agreements to lower some tariffs.
Yeah, contentious sectors highlighted include chips and notably rare earths, where Beijing has reportedly gained a significant edge.
What's the issue with rare earths?
On rare earths, China reportedly hasn't honored a pledge to lift export controls on some of these materials. The deputy U.S. Treasury Secretary is quoted saying, resolving this requires a discussion between the presidents.
How dominant is China in this area?
Very. China's market share in these essential metals is vast, producing almost 70% of the world's rare earth needed for things like fighter aircraft, nuclear reactor rods, and other key technologies.
So that creates a vulnerability for the U.S.
A real vulnerability for the U.S. defense supply chain due to China's ability to restrict exports. Furthermore, limits on Chinese separation and refining technology hinder U.S. attempts to develop alternative sources.
And it affects more than just defense.
The impact isn't just military. Restrictions on light rare earths used in consumer products could affect the broader U.S. economy.
How is China responding strategically to sanctions?
China's strategic response is also detailed. Huawei, for instance, has reportedly invested in over 60 Chinese chip-related firms since 2019 through its investment company, Hubble, targeting design, materials, manufacturing, and testing.
Their goal?
Their explicit strategy is to develop a controllable supply chain. They also have close ties to a chip equipment maker, reportedly pursuing advanced lithography, which was formerly a Huawei division, building self-sufficiency.
Finally, let's touch on AI, data centers, and directed energy weapons. Concerns about data centers.
Yes, growing concerns highlighted about the physical vulnerability of AI data centers. Experts like former Google CEO Eric Schmidt suggested physical attacks could become part of a digital arms race, and even raised the possibility of space-based data centers as a solution.
How likely are attacks?
A former White House cyber official stated it's highly likely that data centers will become targets of physical attacks in the next 5 years. A successful attack would be devastating, delaying AI training, crippling services, and having national security repercussions.
And defenses are lacking.
As data centers become critical infrastructure, the report suggests their physical defenses are reportedly lagging behind.
AI itself is also being integrated into other areas. FDA, Samsung.
That's right. The FDA, for example, introduced ELSA, an AI tool designed to enhance efficiency in clinical reviews and scientific evaluations. Samsung is also reportedly nearing a deal with Perplexity AI to integrate AI search tech into its devices, potentially starting with the Galaxy S26 in 2026, and is discussing AI-infused operating systems and AI agents, so it's spreading everywhere.
Okay. Turning to directed energy weapons, or DWs, Israel's Iron Beam got attention.
Yes, Israel's recent combat use of a lower-powered laser defense system, the Iron Beam, has drawn considerable attention.
How does that compare to China's capabilities?
Comparing this to China's DWs, the sources note China's PLA hasn't officially revealed its systems, but Chinese-made lasers like Silent Hunter and Shenong Shield have been used elsewhere.
What can those do?
Silent Hunter is described as capable of burning through steel and having a hard kill range against drones, while Shenong Shield also boasts notable power output and kill ranges.
But how advanced are they really?
However, expert assessment in the sources suggests China hasn't yet produced a robust, combat-validated laser weapon that can match high-power, fully integrated concepts like Israel's system. So maybe not quite there yet.
Wow. So we've covered an immense amount of ground today, haven't we? All of it pulled directly from the sources you provided.
You certainly have. It's a lot to take in.
Absolutely. We've navigated everything from the immediate impacts of tariff changes on specific industries and jobs to the stark realities of 8 distribution sites in Gaza,
Hmm.
the unexpected innovation in Ukraine's drone warfare contrasted with stalled peace talks, debates over government funding, and what names mean for national identity,
Right, environmental rollbacks impacting specific communities.
and significant, potentially concerning shifts in U.S. vaccine policy and public health agencies, all the way to the edge of space weapons and AI infrastructure vulnerabilities.
It really paints a picture of a world experiencing rapid shifts and intense pressures across many different domains simultaneously.
So, with all of that in mind, and keeping in mind it's all drawn from your material, here's something to consider. Given the rapid pace of change across so many critical areas we've discussed, from trade and conflict to technology and health policy, how does understanding these individual issues help us prepare for a future where they aren't separate challenges, but increasingly intertwined?